Welcome back to Calculated Risk. I am Tyler Shoemaker, joined as always by Kelley Ford. Kelley had an awesome action-packed week 6. I know week 7 is going to be awesome. We're going to talk about that later on, but week 6 was great. It did not disappoint. Texas, Oklahoma was awesome. Alabama A&M was exciting. You had a blocked field goal for a touchdown. They got called back. There was some wild stuff all day. So what were your initial thoughts on week 6?
Yeah, Tyler, you touched on a couple games there. Then you have Louisville upsetting Notre Dame in the primetime window. And then late night, Fresno State goes down to Wyoming. And we had USC nearly going down in triple overtime to Arizona. We haven't even talked about the mistake in Miami. I could not believe that when I saw that. And then it was brought back to my attention that something similar happened to Cristobal when he was at Oregon back in 2018. So this is not the first time something like that has happened. I was just in shock. It was beginning to end of the day, wall to wall. The Buckeyes looks like they might be in trouble for a good bit of the game against Maryland, and then Ohio State pulls it out. So all in all, great day of college football. Tyler's a good day for the models. I know, my model did very well with regard to absolute air, and then also with regard to, picking some games that maybe it disagreed with Vegas on, the outright winners. I know your model had success as well. I think across the board, it was a validation day for some of the models that are out there. Mine, and I think yours as well, included in that.
Yeah, for sure. And like we talked about going into the weekend, had Texas won that game or even covered the spread there, or, some of those other games where I had a different outright winner picked, like that's not really going to change anything in terms of my process or anything, but it was really good. It did feel really good to kind of get some validation on some of those, because TSI actually had Wyoming picked as an outright winner as well in that game against Fresno. So I had a couple outright winners that went against Vegas that went in my favor this week. It doesn't always work out. I was way off on the Ole Miss Alabama game, so not always right, certainly, but it does feel good when those come through for us.
Feels very good when it does. I looked really quickly here. Yeah, I had Fresno -5, so I did not have that one outright. So good for you, man. That's awesome. Yes, take the wins when we can get them. No one else is going to shout our praises, Tyler. So we have to pat ourselves on the back sometimes when it works. I had somebody tweet at me. It was like, hey, I've used KFord ratings. I forget what he said, 5-2 this week, 7-3 over the last 2 weeks, something like that. And I was like, hey, that is not my primary motivator by any means, but I love the fact that you're using my numbers for your financial gains. More people out there, if you're doing it, let me know. That's awesome. And if it's losing you money, just keep that one to yourself. No, I'm kidding. Let me know that too. It's all good.
Yeah, no, I'm at the point. I do bet a lot on these games, but I'm to the point where I honestly get more satisfaction or more, guilt, kind of, pit of your stomach feeling, knowing that other people are winning or losing off of my numbers than what I'm doing. Like I'll be fine either way, but I hate that feeling when someone's like, oh, I tailed you on all these picks, and then you go, 3-8 or something that upsets me. But we actually did have a good weekend. Thinking here, there were a lot of people that I really respect that had bet Colorado State -2, -3, depending on when you bet it, against Utah State. TSI had Utah State picked as a 15-point favorite in that game, and they won by 20. So that was a huge they got down 17-0 after like 3 minutes, and I was like, oh my God. But then they came back and won 44-24. So that was another really validating win for us. But anyway, enough victory laps. Let's take a look at Kelley and I's updated power ratings going into week 7. Did have some shakeup. And again, as we talked about, at this point, I think now all FBS teams, I've phased out all preseason priors. I'm now using only 2023 on-field data for my numbers. So, like Georgia last week, that as far as my power ratings go, Georgia had fallen to number 17 for me last week. They get a nice 5-point bump here this week, back up in the top 10 after they throttled Kentucky. Now, I don't think Kentucky was as good as a lot of people thought. However, I only had Georgia projected to win by 9.5. They won by like 100, so they got a nice bump. They're back up in the top 10, and honestly, I think 8, behind the teams that they're behind, I think that's probably appropriate based on what we've seen so far this year. Kelley, I'll let you look at mine, and then I'll cross-examine. What about my ratings jumps out to you here for looking at our top 30 here?
One more victory lap for me, Tyler. I'm jumping on that Utah State bandwagon. I did have them -6 as well. So not as
Let's
much
go.
as you did, but I did have them -6. So as I look at yours here, Tyler, similar things that stuck out to me last week continue to stick out to me here this week. If we're looking at it here, I've got Duke. You've got Duke number 10. Duke for me is number 24 this week. Ole Miss is another one as I look at the bottom of your top 10, who they rose a little bit for me. So we're a little bit more in alignment there. Georgia, they like for you, they bounced up for me in this game. Michigan, I'm finally with you on that one. So you had them number 3. I now have them up to number 4. So the big one to me at the very top continues to be Duke. Miami, it might look weird to some folks out there. You've got them number 14. I've got them number 20. Despite what happened there from a power rating perspective, they're still, top 15, top 20 team, as you can see there. Yeah, I mean, our numbers, Tyler, they're starting to look more and more in alignment, which again is interesting because you said you phased them out entirely, the preseason priors, that is, for all teams. You've got some that have played 5 games, some that have played, upwards of 7, like Notre Dame. I still have preseason priors in there, but for the most part, our numbers are looking pretty similar. Duke's really the only one between yours and mine, Tyler, that stands out as kind of out there and different as I quickly scan your top even 30. I mean, SMU, that's one we've talked about before. You've got them there at number 26.
Yeah, I don't know what SMU had to have paid TSI off in some capacity. I don't they honestly, so SMU and Cincinnati is not my top 30, but Cincinnati is still pretty high, I think, in terms of their power rating. And I think a lot of that is just linked to both of those teams played Oklahoma relatively well, and Oklahoma is such a juggernaut in my numbers that it's propping up SMU and Cincinnati. So again, that's one of the, I don't want to say downside because I don't necessarily know that that's a downside, but it is a consequence of the aggressive nature of my phasing out of preseason priors. And Duke is a prime example. Duke being in my top 10 and barely in your top 25 makes sense because from a preseason standpoint, I can't imagine that we were too terribly high on them. So, I did think that I did kind of expect them to drop this week after, just looking at some of their opponents like Clemson, who they got a lot of credit for early on. Like Clemson really struggled with Wake Forest. So, we'll see how that number evolves. Duke was off this week, so we'll see how that number kind of evolves. And then especially, I haven't heard an injury update on Riley Leonard. So, if he can't play, Duke's performance is going to start to suffer, and their rating will obviously go down at that point. Anything else before I take a look at yours, Kelly?
The final thing here, I talked about SMU, Air Force, the same thing. So as similar themes we talked about all year, the G5 programs, the top of the G5 for you, as I have these teams right now, they're not in my top 30. You don't see them on the screen, but SMU's 38, Air Force is number 40. So for you to have them, top 25, 6, 7 there, they're in my top 40. But those are the big differences, Duke and then the G5s. That's what's sticking out to me, Tyler.
Yeah, it's funny because those teams in particular, Duke, SMU, and Air Force, all three, in looking at these early lines for week 7, are three teams that I'm like, I'm probably gonna bet them this week because again, you're much more in line with odds makers on that. Like I think Duke is only like a 3.5 point favorite right now against NC State, coming off a crazy game against Marshall. I had a Marshall +7 ticket that pushed. I cannot believe that game combined for 89 points. That was absolutely nuts. I thought it was going to be like a 10-7 rock fight, and it ended up being Oklahoma versus Texas Tech.
On the CW. Did you have that one on? I turned it on. It was on the CW for us.
I did watch it. I'm Thundering Herd are kind of my G5 team because I grew up going to Marshall games. My dad's had season Marshall tickets forever, so Marshall's my G5 team. So I definitely watched that. I was rooting on the Herd, but they couldn't get it done. But anyway, so I'll take a look at yours here, Kelly. I'm glad to see that you have Ole Miss number 11. They're number 9 for me. I don't know. That's one that separating Tyler the person and TSI the model. Like I don't know that I'm bought in on Ole Miss from an eye test standpoint. Obviously, I put my money where my mouth was on them against Alabama, and they looked like crap against them. They've beaten some. I guess you give them credit for beating LSU. I mean, you got LSU number 12, they're number 23 for me. They did beat them last week, but man, I don't know that I'm sold on Ole Miss. So that jumps out as kind of validation that our models are kind of seeing them similarly. Louisville on the climb for you. We've got them pretty much the same right there around 20. Kansas State, they're man, I had a live bet on them -4.5 against Oklahoma State because I thought there's no way they're going to lose to Oklahoma State, right? Like they were 11, 12-point favorites. I had them projected to win by like 24, but just reading the market throughout the week, I didn't have a pregame bet on them because I was like, something's weird here. And sure enough, they laid a big egg, and they got to turn it around because I mean their schedule's not super easy the rest of the way out. I had high hopes for Kansas State, but if they're going to play like that, I don't know what to make of them.
Tyler, there's two places that I think, just, model aside, I think there's two places that I don't want to go play on the road, especially at night in the Big 12. One of them's Stillwater, and the other one's Ames. It doesn't really matter, it seems like, how good those two teams are. Those are tough places to play, especially for conference opponents at night. Yeah,
I mean, Kansas State made Alan Bowman, the Oklahoma State quarterback, who's kind of bounced around all over the place. He's in his 5th or 6th year of eligibility. They made him look like Tom Brady out there. I mean, he was just dropping balls in a bucket on that Kansas State defense. I could not believe it. Maryland, pretty high for you. I think Maryland's just outside my top 30, I believe. Yeah, I've got them 35, so pretty aligned on them. They gave Ohio State all they wanted, especially for 2.5, 3 quarters of that game before Ohio State finally woke up and turned it on. But no, I mean, it's good to see that our models are, like you said, kind of getting in sync, and we don't have huge outliers at this point like we did. And obviously, as the season goes on, I think that trend will continue. Obviously, we'll have our Week 7 look ahead show dropping on Thursday. But Kelley, I just want to get your quick thoughts. Oregon and Washington. I mean, that's going to be huge. That's huge implications there. Well, we'll deep dive it on the Thursday show, but I just want to get your kind of early thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a fantastic game. I haven't updated my watchability scores for this week yet, but I won't be surprised at all if this is the #1 game of the week in that metric. It was the #1 game of the week in this metric a week ago, and things haven't changed that much with these two teams having both been off this past week. We know power ratings can still change when a team is off. We've talked about that before. But yeah, I'm excited about it. The fact that it's at Washington, I think, makes it even more interesting for me. If I look at the power ratings on these two teams, and again, I haven't updated my dashboards yet, but I add the home field advantage in there. I mean, I'm looking at Oregon like -1, maybe. Maybe it's a pick 'em for me. It's somewhere in between, a half point and a point, with Oregon being favored here on the road. If I'm doing this math right in my head, yeah. So it's going to be a really good game, Tyler. I think the pick 'em, Oregon -1. I don't even know what the line opened at. I went to the Colts game today and wasn't able to do as much. Wasn't able to do as much ratings work as I usually do on a Sunday. So that's where I am. But hey, 2 by my numbers, top 9. 2 by your numbers, top 7 power rated teams in a rivalry game in the last year of the Pac-12 with a lot on the line, and USC looking vulnerable. Oh my gosh, Tyler, I know we're talking Oregon, Washington. I want to get your thoughts quickly on it too. I know we'll deep dive it. USC, I sent one of my buddies a text watching that game. And did you ever watch Breaking Bad? Is that a show you're familiar with? Yeah. Okay, so some people are, some people aren't. It's like massively popular. I'm surprised some people that haven't seen it. So I never want to assume. Anyway, when Jesse is like screaming near the end of the series, like he can't keep getting away with it, like that gif. I sent that to one of my friends and said, this is how I feel watching USC every single week for the past 2 years now. Like they can't keep getting away with this, yet somehow they keep getting away with it. They keep winning. They have fallen in my power ratings now to a season low number 14. My point in sharing this piece is, with USC looking the way they are, now all these teams are going to play each other. The winner of this Oregon-Washington game has a huge advantage and a huge leg up on making it to Las Vegas. It's going to be a fantastic game. I won't be surprised at all if it's my #1 game of the week in watchability.
Yeah, for sure. I watched the first half of the USC game. I could not stay up any longer. My eyelids were pretty heavy. But
Tyler, I'm disappointed in you. I'm not going to lie. I'm disappointed in you.
You know what's really annoying for me? I bet under 72 in that game. At the end of regulation, it's 28-28. even after the first overtime, my under ticket would have cashed, but it went to 3 overtimes, and obviously I lost the under there. But it was a great bet. I think I would make it again. But
unpopular opinion, real quick on that, because since I don't bet, I feel like I can say this from an objective standpoint. Over under tickets should be cashed at the end of regulation. I'm sorry, that's the way I feel. I know that's not the way it works. I know betting people lose their minds when I say that. I don't bet. So I have an objective view on this. I am not impacted by this at all. I don't even put out my over-under projections because to me, that's a strictly betting function, and I don't like to be a part of that. People ask me for it, and I give it to them offline, but I don't even put it out there. So I have no dog in this fight. Over-under tickets should be cashed at the end of regulation. I'm sorry. That's the way I feel.
And in terms of like my personal sheet, now when I update the results in my public sheet that everyone sees, like I update it what the actual final score was, graded a loss because it technically went over. But in my personal sheet, whether I win or lose, and you know, Lord knows I've lost some of these in regulation and got the benefit of overtime. But I always grade it from like how am I going to optimize my process? I grade it after regulation because to me, like, what are we doing? We're trying to predict overtime now. Like I don't like it either, but that's a subject for another day. But
you could almost do your spread grading that way too, Tyler. I mean, I don't know if you do. Maybe
I do. I do. On my personal sheet, I do. On the public sheet, I do it for what it is because I know as soon as I try to do that, someone's going to be like, "Well, you graded this a winner, but I lost money on it." So I grade it for what it is. But on my personal sheet, I do grade spreads and totals. What happened at the end of regulation. So, putting a bow on week 6 here, any closing thoughts, any takeaways that, you know, maybe we should keep our eye on, either just from a team standpoint or from a power rating standpoint going forward? Anything else jump out to you?
Yeah, I'll just share sometimes I forget those that are listening and not viewing the screen. I'll share my top 10 quickly, Tyler, and you should do the same too before we get out. I got power rating wise, Ohio State still number 1. Oklahoma's number 2 for me. Georgia has jumped up to number 3. Michigan's 4. Penn State 5. Oregon 6. Alabama 7. Texas 8. Washington 9. And Florida State number 10. Biggest takeaways, Tyler, in terms of movers this week. I know we don't dive into this anymore since we're so deep in the year, but top teams that really the model upgraded this week, you know, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Louisville. Those are all teams that ended up in the top 10 of my biggest movers. They moved up at least 2.5 points. So those are teams that are at the top that I upgraded. Not really a ton of teams at the top that got downgraded significantly. You know, Syracuse, I think the Magic might have run out on the orange, and Miami also down about 2.5 points for me this week. In terms of the season movers, it's still Oklahoma's show, and Oregon as well. They're up there. Duke, Colorado, Washington, Rutgers. Those are the Power 5 teams in the top 10 of my biggest movers on the way up. Baylor, man, I don't know what's going on. I love Dave Aranda. I like that Baylor program. They're down 11.4 points from the preseason. Yeah. That's the largest drop from the preseason to current. And it's not close, Tyler. The next largest is 8.7. That's North Texas. So nearly 3 points of a more significant drop for Baylor preseason to current than any other team. Other Power 5 teams in my top 10 biggest movers down since the preseason: Illinois, Minnesota, tough in the Big Ten West, I guess, Pitt, and Arizona State. All those teams in my top 10 biggest fallers, biggest downgrades from preseason to current. So those are teams to keep an eye on, trending up, down, either this week or over the course of the year, that I would say from a power rating standpoint.
Yeah, Baylor, I don't know what happened to them, but I know I bet Texas Tech -1 against them this week. That was an easy cash. That was one of my best bets in my VSiN.com article. Baylor was coming off that crazy fourth quarter comeback. They were in a terrible spot. That was probably my best bet of the day. So I'll run through my top 10 real quick. Oklahoma still number 1. They've been number 1 for me for a few weeks now. Oregon number 2. Very curious to see, you know, if Oregon, you know, takes care of business against Washington this week, as you project and as I project. Very curious, because I think Oregon's only a couple of points behind Oklahoma from a rating standpoint. So I'm very curious if they could make up ground there and potentially take over the number 1 spot next week. But Michigan 3, Ohio State 4, Penn State and Texas are actually tied at 5, Washington 7, Georgia 8, Ole Miss 9, and Duke number 10. So again, Duke, the clear outlier here, one that I'm fascinated to see, you know, how that holds up and withstands kind of the test of time here over the next few weeks of their schedule. But think that's going to do it for us here on our Week 6 recap. We'll be back previewing all the biggest games of Week 7 on Thursday. But until then, for Kelley Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.